Hello. Thank you so much for being here with us for the latest installment of the McCloskey Speaker Series. Huge thanks, as always, to Bonnie and Tom McCloskey for making this possible. And my name is Vivian Schiller. I am the Executive Director of Aspen Digital. We are a program of the Aspen Institute that focuses on all things at the intersection of media, journalism, technology, internet innovation, and their impact on society, on communities, on democracy in the world. So just tiny little areas of focus for us. But I am also before joining the Aspen Institute, pretty much a lifelong journalist. So I am super thrilled to be having this conversation today. The name of the session, as I think you know, is Partisan Politics, Social Disruption, and Living Under a Pandemic, America in 2022. So we have 1 hour to talk about politics, changing nature of society, global pandemic, no problem. But the fact is all of these issues, as you know, are intertwined. Everything is political. Everything has huge implications for society. The pandemic, disrupted and perhaps accelerated a lot of those changes. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And things were already moving pretty quickly in the US and around the world. So everything that we're going to talk about today really has huge implications. And especially now as we count down towards the midterms, we can expect to see some greater change. So luckily, we have two people who are really brilliant on this topic. Michelle Goldberg is a columnist for the New York Times. She was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize, author of 3 books, frequent commentator on radio and television, and has been published in pretty much all the most prestigious publications out there. Tim Miller is the Bulwark's writer at large. He was previously political director for Republican Voters Against Trump, communications director for Jeb Bush 2016, spokesman for the Republican National Committee, and as I hope you saw when you came in the room, the author of a recent book, which he will be signing copies. They will be available for sale after this session, called Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican Road to Hell, which is lovely.
Subtle.
It's subtle, yeah. Okay, so let's get into it. I want to start, just because it's on everybody's mind, I want to start with sort of the things that are happening like right now, this week, last week, next week, and talk a little bit about the primaries that are really in full throttle. I guess we're winding down a little bit in August, and a preview of the midterms. So I'm going to start with you, Tim. I want to ask you both what you see coming out of these primaries and the early days of sort of the general election, and what you think the implications are for November and beyond.
These primaries are pretty scary, is what we're saying, coming out of the primaries. I think that it's sort of hard to appreciate, right? Because eventually, there when the needle is at 10, and the needle's in the red all the time, it's kind of hard to distinguish between deep, dark red danger and kind of light red danger. But the Republicans that are winning these primaries, make the Tea Party candidates from 2010 look like George H.W. Bush by comparison. It's a madhouse of candidates. They're essentially running based on fealty to Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election. That's the main issue in most of these primaries, who's willing to be the most loyal to Donald Trump's failed coup attempt. There are a few exceptions to that in a couple of states. One of them, I'm happy to say, right here in Colorado. I'm a Coloradan. It's nice to be home. Hey, everybody. And in Georgia, where Brad Raffensperger won an important Secretary of State's primary, and Brian Kemp, So in these 2 states are really kind of the exceptions that prove the rule. I think part of the reason is the nature of the electorate, younger, more dynamic states, younger people moving in, more people with college degrees. That's part of it. I think that people are happier with the governance in Georgia is another reason that's part of it. I think that here Joe O'Dea, who won the Senate nomination, is not insane, which is pretty low bar to step over, but pretty nice for Republican primaries. You go down 1 state to Arizona. The slate that just won in Arizona on Tuesday is extremely scary. Carrie Lake is running based on hallucinations about the 2020 primary and demands that whoever was responsible for the theft be jailed. The Secretary of State candidate was the same. Blake Masters, who's the Senate nominee, wants to jail Anthony Fauci. A lot of jailing happening. And so, yeah, I mean, it's darkly funny, but it's concerning. If you look at what is happening, the Pennsylvania, I think it's possible, we'll get into the general, but it's possible this will be a wave year, and it's possible that the Republicans will wash in Doug Mastriano, who is there at the Capitol on January 6th in Pennsylvania, and Carrie Lake, who, as I just said, is a Stop the Steal radical, as the governors of Arizona and Pennsylvania, two key states that they will have to certify the 2024 election. So I think it's deeply, deeply concerning what is happening. It's sometimes hard to wrap your head around to say, oh, Republicans have been putting up crazy guys for a while. It's what some liberals think. Or, Donald Trump was so crazy, how much worse could it get? This is really bad. The difference between the types of people who were in the Republican Party in 2020 versus who might be in 2024 is pretty dramatic.
Michelle.
I agree with most of that, except that I actually think it goes this. There was a cover story in the New York Times Magazine a few weeks ago by Charles Homans about the Stop the Steal movement, and one of the points he made, which I think is right, is that in some ways this movement transcends Donald Trump at this point. There's obviously a lot of kind of loyalty and fealty to Donald Trump, but if you look at some of these characters, like Blake Masters in Arizona, or even, Doug Mastriano is, in some ways just much more of a Christian nationalist than he is a Trumpist. And the Stop the Steal movement, I think at this point is, it's obviously partly about a conspiracy theory about the 2020 election, but it's also about who has the legitimacy to participate in American democracy. And that's where I think this right-wing radicalization, that's why it goes beyond Trump and why it's very hard for me to imagine any election in the foreseeable future ending without real social upheaval. Because if you have one political party that believes, that Democrats are kind of illegitimate political actors, and that an election that they won, there was cheating kind of by definition, it's hard to see how you ever come to any kind of social consensus about the outcome. Kamala Harris will presumably be the person over, the person playing the Mike Pence role, so they won't be able to pressure the vice president to act in that way. And also, the Senate is passing the Electoral Count Act, or passing a fixed Electoral Count Act that will do away with that particular danger. But, some of those people that Tim mentioned, they're going to be the candidates playing the role that Brad Raffensperger played in the last election, right? The people that Donald Trump calls up and says, can't you just find me 11,000 more votes? I think their answer is going to be like, I'm already on it. The only slight ray of hope is that, I think I had expected, like everybody's been expecting it to be a wave year, both because of just the normal sort of thermostatic nature of American politics, and also because of, the just kind of objectively bad conditions in the country right now. And, Joe Biden's kind of pretty bad approval rating. There are some glimmers that that's changing. I think right now Democrats are favored to keep the Senate and maybe even add seats to the Senate. It will be a much tougher thing for them to hold the House, because even if they get the most vote, American politics is set up so that even if Democrats get the most votes for the House, that doesn't mean that they're going to get to control the chamber. But you've seen the polls in the sort of generic ballot. Democrats have been ahead in enough of them recently that it no longer looks like just noise. And then I think we just had this really stunning result in Kansas. And that doesn't necessarily, it
Just
doesn't
say a word about it,
okay.
just so everybody.
So maybe you all saw this, Kansas, basically Kansas had its own version of Roe versus Wade, this 2019 Supreme Court decision that held that the Kansas Constitution protects the right to choice. which is why, while after Roe fell and a lot of the neighboring states are passing total abortion bans, Kansas hasn't. And so there was, even before Roe fell, they put this ballot initiative, or they put this initiative on the ballot, basically saying, do you want to change the Constitution so that we could legislate more abortion restrictions? And I was supposed to go to Kansas last week. I couldn't because of flight drama, but I was talking to people in Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. They were cautiously optimistic. I talked to some pollsters similarly, like cautiously optimistic, because in general, I think in any referendum, the no side has an advantage because people just tend to be kind of a little bit averse to change. But, they were like, we think it's going to be close. And it was not close. I think the pro-choice side won by, I believe, 18 points. The turnout was like what nobody predicted. The turnout was midterm level turnout. And so there are a lot of people out there, a lot of women out there, because this is something so personal. This is something that touches so many people, sort of whatever their politics. And there was if you look at the numbers, there was a lot of Trump voters who went out and voted the pro-choice side on this referendum. So that suggests that there is some energy, there's some kind of politically volatile factor at work here. I don't think that automatically translates into Democratic votes because you've seen in other places, you look at Florida in 2020, people voted for the referendum to raise the minimum wage. They still voted for Donald Trump. Sometimes this is something that all Democratic politicians and activists lament to no end, is that their issues are always more popular than they are. And so trying to
vibes. It's all about the vibes.
It is about the vibes, right?
Bad.
So whether or not, but nevertheless, I think that after like a long period when just Democratic voters and Democratic activists have been so dejected, have been in such despair, have been having a kind of collective nervous breakdown, it's a shot in the arm, and I think successes build on each other.
So I want to stick with 2022 for a minute, and then we're going to move in a little while onto some other issues. By the way, the countdown clock is not operating, and there's no. If I can just get the time up there or anything, because I don't have a watch. I'm sorry, just because I want to keep us on time. Because I'm happily will stay here all evening, but I don't know that the rest of you can. So. It's well established that, in primaries, when, in the case of, the GOP primaries that are rolling out over the course of the summer, that there is sort of a competition to go those bring the most loyal, and there's going to be a competition to go who can go the most right. Now that we're seeing that a lot of extreme Trump supporters, let me put it that way, extreme Trump supporters or Trumpists are winning these primaries, what does that portend for the general election in terms of where people will more broadly vote and you may not have just the super intense party loyalists?
Just one quick shout out about the primaries, since we're kind of getting on a nerdy Aspen Ideas panel here. One thing that is testing out pretty well in real time is the jungle primary, this top two notion where...
So explain what that is.
Yeah, so that is where instead of having the Republicans have a primary and the Democrats have a primary, everybody, all of the candidates are in one primary and then the top two go into the general election. And so sometimes in certain districts that might be two Republicans or two Democrats or a Republican and Democrat. The interesting thing about this is of the 10 Republicans that voted to impeach Donald Trump, only 3 are going to survive. Liz Cheney hasn't died yet, God love her, but it's going down pretty soon. So only 3 will survive. Maybe Liz Cheney gets a miracle from the heavens. And all 3 are in jungle primaries in Washington State and California. And so it was just an interesting kind of test case, right? That we could create a system. It isn't inevitable that we have this system where people have to run to the extremes to the primaries and then we have to deal with these crazy candidates in the general. Anyway, as far as the Republicans are concerned, I'm a rain cloud by nature, so I'm a little less optimistic than you are about...
I'm not very optimistic.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll even a step less optimistic than your soft pessimism about the Democrats rebounding in November. I think that they're underdogs in the Senate and the House still today. But the Republicans are going to leave some seats on the table. And this is just objective analysis. This is not, if you look at the types of candidates, like in Georgia, Republicans are putting up Herschel Walker, who literally, had voices in his head telling him that he should kill people. Like he's talking about this on the campaign trail, and he used to play Russian roulette with people at his house, where you spin and then pull the trigger. I mean, this is a person that needs psychiatric care, not needs to be in the Senate. And then you have in Ohio, like J.D. Vance was running on vaccine conspiracies and election conspiracies, and Tim Ryan is kind of this normal center-left Democrat, right? So the types of candidates that are being put up are pretty different, and I think that the Republicans are probably going to leave a couple seats on the table because of this. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania is another one. Dr. Oz is Dr. Oz. I don't know that I need to explain that very much. He's losing right now by double digits. So some of this stuff is going to narrow as you get back to the general election. But we've seen this in the past with Republicans where they've nominated people who are just too far outside the mainstream. I think for some reason, because Donald Trump won, a lot of times people are like, I don't know, well, people will vote for any crazy asshole these days. Like, what the hell do I know? That's not really true. Like, Donald Trump was unique in a lot of ways, which we could do a whole evening on. But yeah, I think Republicans are going to leave some seats on the table because of the types of candidates they have. But just historically speaking, like literally since 1930, there have only been two first midterms where the party in power gained seats. One was right after 9/11, and the other was in 1934. Well, that's changed since 1934. So I think that the Democrats probably will lose some that they don't expect, which is usually what happens in waves, and then win against some of these extreme candidates.
And coming back to the Kansas decision, what impact do you think? I mean, that has to have woken up a lot of candidates, including Republican candidates, that maybe abortion is not a winning proposition to run on. What impact do you think that will have?
Well, they're sort of locked into this position because it's the position, and again, this is something that I'm kind of a broken record on, but I believe very, very strongly that the biggest problem in American politics is minority rule. It is that we have these counter-majoritarian institutions, that have the Senate, where we sort of give representation to land rather than people, gerrymandering the Electoral College, the filibuster that exacerbates the counter-majoritarian parts of the Senate. And these are all they're getting worse and worse, some for reasons, just of sort of natural geographic sorting, where, people, ideologically more like-minded people are congregating in cities. The parties are becoming, this is happening everywhere in the Western world, right? That you have kind of people in cities moving to the left and rural people moving to the right. And then you have the machinations of gerrymandering, the filibuster, the gerrymandering of state legislatures, which is, I think, how you get these really extreme, unpopular abortion bans that don't leave exemptions for rape and incest. And, it's how you get a Republican Party in Idaho, a place where the Republican Party has very little competition, just came out with a new platform with calling for a total abortion ban without an exemption for cases where the pregnant woman's life is at stake. Somebody offered such an amendment, and they voted it down. So I imagine, and Tim probably knows more about me, Tim probably knows more than I do about this, that there are people in the Republican Party who are freaking out a little bit about some of this. And I've seen some of this on Twitter, people saying that, because I think part of what's happening is that people are seeing, anybody who has reported extensively on reproductive rights could have predicted and did predict that as soon as Roe versus Wade was overturned and total abortion bans went into effect, that you were going to start having cases of really egregious miscarriage mismanagement. It's something you see in other countries that have abortion bans. It's something you see very frequently in Catholic hospitals that operate under, abortion prohibitions, although there's a safety valve because the patients can be transferred. Once that safety valve was taken away, it was just completely predictable what's happening. But people are seeing what's happening. They're seeing these horror stories, and they're reacting against it. And so I've seen some Republicans say, okay, we need to make our laws much more clear that, that doctors can intervene in emergency situations when otherwise someone's going to die or otherwise the pregnancy is not viable. But whether or not there's any will or ability given the base of the party to moderate more than that, I would be surprised.
Yeah, I think there's going to be very little will for that. I think different states, right? In Virginia, for example, which is basically a blue state that Glenn Youngkin wins, I think he came out with I think it was 15 or 18-week ban with exceptions. People could have complaints about that, but so I think that in certain places there'll be moderation, but not in red states, not in places where the politician has higher political ambitions, doesn't want to be attacked in a future primary. This is a bottom-up thing from the Republican primary base. They're demanding the most extreme position on this. So I think that my opinion is that I'm not sure. I think it's unknown how much the abortion issue will impact the House and Senate elections. I think a lot of voters kind of separate that from their mind, that this is because Congress hasn't done anything about this in 50 years, so they don't kind of associate Congress with doing anything about it, and it'll be up to the Democrats to make the case that they will. They haven't while they've have been in power. I think that works against them. I do think it will matter in the governor's race is a big deal. And so going back to just Kari Lake and Doug Mastriano, for example, these are swing states. For people who are super engaged like me, the fact that they want to steal the next election is pretty much the biggest issue. But I think that a lot of people just have trouble wrapping their head around that. That doesn't impact them. Both of them are very extreme, no exceptions, literally Idaho-style positions on abortion, and they will be the governor of the state. Voters do associate that with, oh my gosh, this is going to impact my state, my kid, my, whatever, people in my life. And so I think that's going to harm them in governor's races, Republicans, a great deal, more than in the federal level.
So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about where the parties are going. I'll stick with you for a minute, Tim. I mean, you were a Republican Party operative. You talk about it a lot in your book. And now, in speaking before this panel, you push back.
I don't sound like one anymore?
Well, you push back on me identifying you as a Republican.
Yeah, no.
What happens with the Republican Party in terms of, does it go more extreme? Does it represent? How many people can it represent if that happens?
Yeah. We only have 26 more minutes. So the shortest possible answer to what happened with the Republican Party is that there was always this kind of, we get very myopic in America about American politics, think we're the only thing that happens, but this has happened all over the world, where the conservative party has become more nationalist, more conspiratorial, more identifying with working class, people who live out in rural parts of the country, from Brazil to Hungary to the UK to France, everywhere. So this trajectory was happening. Donald Trump supercharged it. When he came in, just because of the nature of how unappealing he was to college-educated Republicans like me, and how appealing he was to this new group of people that used to be pro voters or were not part of the process. So he changed literally the makeup of the party. And so a party that was at one point kind of a 50-50 fight between your Chamber of Commerce Republicans and your more radical Republicans, and we'd fight each other, and sometimes we'd win, us moderate rhino cucks, and sometimes they'd win. That fight isn't a fight anymore. We lost the fight because a lot of our voters left the party, and Trump brought in a lot of new people. This is the notion that the party's ever going back to what it was in 1988 is a pipe dream. The best case scenario is that it becomes kind of is that Trump disappears. I won't say how. And that it kind of settles into a more just national, anti-globalist, nationalist, party that would not really appeal to me, but maybe doesn't have some of the conspiratorial stuff, some of the anti-democratic stuff. That's the best case scenario, and I think that the other scenarios get worse from there.
Yeah.
No, that's not the DeSantis path. I mean, the DeSantis path, I think, is a path towards real American Orbanism. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that the Conservative Political Action Conference, they held one in Hungary a few months ago, and now he's here. And I was in Hungary in March covering the attempts by the opposition parties to unite. I mean, it went very badly, but they, were trying to unite to run against Orban. And it was, something that was astonishing about it is that the opposition candidate, Peter Markizoy, kind of a center-right guy, was never on television once in the campaign because the TV stations are controlled by Orban. He was on TV to be, there was attacks on him, but he was never interviewed on television. He was never interviewed in any of the main newspapers. And I think that something that DeSantis is doing that Trump, I think, tried to do, but just doesn't have the mental organization or follow through to do it, is to intimidate organizations in the way that Orban did. The attack on Disney was an early sign of this, just like I am going to bring the full weight of the government down on you if you do not toe the political line. And so, I think, I'm not sure which character is more dangerous for the American future, but I think either one of them, it will be something far more autocratic than anyone who's grown up in America has experienced.
No, Orban was not my best case scenario. I just want to say, I think that there's a chance for like a Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson gets kicked out, but the Boris Johnson model of kind of like this like cultural, being kind of a cultural conservative blowhard and like a nationalist, but like kind of being serious really on policy, like behind the scenes, is like the best case scenario for the party.
But who is that?
We don't have one right now, but like that's like where things could go. I mean, I think that could work here. But no, I mean, DeSantis and Trump are the only two. I was more on the medium-term horizon.
Right.
I was trying to like look off into seeing maybe some sunlight out there in the future. No, I mean, DeSantis and Trump are the two options for the
So
short
how are
term.
the Democrats doing?
Great.
The Democratic Party and the...
I mean, the Democratic Party the Democratic Party has a much more difficult time than the Republican Party because it's just a much more heterogeneous organization. It's, if the Republican Party is kind of captive to its base, the Democratic Party is always torn between lots of different factions. I personally don't think that Joe Biden is going to run again. I mean, I talked to enough people who, I would be very, very surprised if Joe Biden ran again.
Who's the candidate then?
Well, I think there'll be a primary, and it will sort of depend. You can already see people trying to set up their, trying to kind of quietly line up their donors and set up their organizations. So I think my guess is that obviously Kamala Harris would be sort of the heir apparent, but there's a huge amount of concern about her popularity, and because it's not as if there's like a machine right now that controls the Democratic Party that is going to be able to designate someone. So there's going to, so if Biden doesn't run, there will be a primary. Kamala Harris will have an advantage because she's vice president, but she didn't do that well in the last primary, and Democrats are really, really concerned about electability. And so...
She did not do that well.
That's
a nice way to put it.
And so, I think, Pete Buttigieg, I think your governor could be, a possibility. I think we have actually a lot of really, really good governors. So I don't worry about when people, I'm not one of those people who thinks that the Democratic bench is narrow. I mean, I think there's like a lot of terrific people in the Senate. There's a handful of really good governors. Gretchen Whitmer would be a possibility. Gavin Newsom might be too associated with California, but he's doing something which is, I think, what a lot of Democrats want. They want to see somebody going out there and really fighting. And so, I think you could see you could imagine a groundswell behind him. I'm sure if Raphael Warnock wins again in Georgia, which I think he's probably going to do, there will be a lot of talk around him, given that in order to win, the Democratic Party needs to excite Black voters, it needs to excite liberals, and it needs to do better in places like Georgia. And so, and it needs to be able to speak forthrightly to religious people, which is something that Pete has been good at. It's something Raphael Warnock's obviously really good at. So I'm not worried about there being, kind of options out there. I'm just worried about the present, where there's so many metastasizing crises, even if some of them have gotten slightly better in the last few weeks, that, it's very, when things are terrible, people blame the party in power.
One thing that worries me about the Democrats is because I don't mean to pick on you because you say this, and like all the Democratic strategists say this, and they never mention. You know who else Democrats need to do well with is just suburban dads.
Oh, yeah,
like
no,
me.
that's true.
Just like normal old dads, like nothing, all races, and that was like the difference for Joe Biden. And that's like not popular to say. It's like the reason why Joe Biden did better than Hillary Clinton is that because that dad up there and like a couple dads that live in Buckhead who like have been Republicans their whole life are like, I'm sick of this dude. And like Joe Biden seems fine. And so like these Buckhead dads in Georgia like started to vote for Joe Biden. And that's who Joe Biden did better with. He did worse with Hispanics. He did not much better with young voters, not any different really with any of these other demos.
Right, but who else did really, really good with those people is Barack Obama.
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
right.
so, I don't necessarily think you need a middle-aged white man to...
No, that's not what I'm saying.
But no, I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, Democrats are never probably, until there's like some unbelievable realignment, are not going to win a majority of white voters, but they need to do better. They need to do better with them, obviously. And again, they're not going to win a majority of men, but they need to do better with men.
Yeah, they also just need to, they need to do better with men of color, right? They're struggling right now with black men, Hispanic men, or they're starting to lose.
Well, that's why I think somebody like
moderate,
Raphael Warnock has an advantage, or would be considered a possibility.
Hopefully. The thing with the Democrats, I do want to give the Democrats credit about one thing. It's easy for me to pick on the Democrats, and I feel like they don't get credit for this, which is they are self-policing. Some people here might not think this is self-policing. I don't want to speak for everybody, but Chesa Boudin, gets recalled in San Francisco, right? Because people are unhappy with what is happening in the city. Eric Adams, not a perfect dude, right? But people are unhappy with what's happening in the city. That they voted for Joe Biden. They didn't vote for Elizabeth Warren. Like Democratic voters are pragmatic. They are mostly liberal, but I feel like the conversation around Democratic voters is that, they've gone so far left, they all love AOC, and they're all so crazy. And that's just not what's happening in Democratic primaries.
There's a few, I think that, Abigail Spanberger is much closer to the kind of median Democratic member of Congress than, I love AOC.
Is Adam out here? Is Adam out here? Adam won the primary running against Lauren Boebert. He's going to run against, there he is. Hey, Adam. He's running against Lauren Boebert. He ran in a primary on a center-left kind of platform.
You're going to win Aspen.
Yeah, look, I'm not, but he needs to do better in other places, right? I think the Democrats are good at doing that. I'm worried about the bench, but the primaries, Democratic voters, I think really do recognize the threat from Republicans and have made pragmatic choices in a lot of places.
I want to ask one more question, and then I want to go to audience questions because I'm sure you have a lot. We've heard this bubbling up about a possible alliance that would form sort of a third party or a third party candidate. Your thoughts?
So here, some people here might want a third party. Here's my question. Okay, you want to start a third party, right? Ross Perot, everybody remember Ross Perot? Okay. He got 0 electoral votes, but he did pretty good. Okay, he got 13% of, I might have this backwards, 13% of Democrats, 17% of Republicans. So if you want to start a third party, you need to get, and you want to win, you need to get a quarter of people that voted for Donald Trump. Okay, not Republicans like me. You don't need to win me over. I voted for Joe Biden. Okay, so if your coalition is a center-left Democrat plus some never-Trumpers, all of you voted for Joe Biden. You're not a third party. You're in the Democratic Party. You just don't want to admit it. Okay? So if you want to start a third party, you got to go win Donald Trump voters. And not just not like the 2% of Donald Trump voters who held their nose and voted for him anyway. You got to get people who like Donald Trump, who are like, I went there and I got friends, I got a red hat, and I watch Fox. Okay, so if you want to come up with a third party that can do that, then I'm all ears. But everybody that calls me and wants to do a third party wants to be, why can't we be socially conservative but fiscally or socially moderate and fiscally conservative? It's there are no voters for that.
That's a popular,
they're Democrats.
Right. No, even if they're not Democrats, that is a demographic that you probably have got a lot of them in Aspen. We've got a lot of them in New York. There's some in D.C., San Francisco, LA, nowhere else. If you look at the kind of scatter graphs of people's ideology on the social issues and economic issues, the least populated quadrant is that one. The least populated quadrant is fiscally conservative but socially liberal. I mean, there's a lot of those people
Sucks, I know.
in the places where there's a lot of those people in places, in the sort of circles that, not my own personal circles, but in places where, I meet a lot of those people. And I think that some of them believe that there are more of them out there than there really are. The most underserved quadrant, the quadrant where you could have a third party, this is the scary, is the socially conservative, fiscally liberal, the kind of what Josh Hawley pretends to be but isn't. If you kind of come up with someone who actually was willing to really expand the safety net, to really kind of, to be much more redistributive, but also to stop gay marriage. And, I think that would have a huge constituency. But the people who are like, both parties are too extreme, why can't we have something, the people who think that that this Andrew Yang party is going to account to, Andrew Yang, people who think that this is going to amount to something, that's not where they are.
Okay, oh my God. Agreement. Okay, we're going to go to questions. We do want to use, do we have mics? We have mics, okay. So Mike, please wait for the mics. You had your hand up right away. Can we get a mic here? Or I saw you first, sorry, and then we'll move around. Please say your name if you care to. Okay.
Marty Budd. Tim was very concerned and negative about all of the extraordinary primary winners extremely to the right. But in fact, there are some people like myself who believe, like the Democrats in Michigan, that that's a great thing for the Democrats. That in fact, this is a good sign that the people of America generally are not going to vote for the Laura Bobbitt's or.
But they did. She's
Marty.
your congresswoman.
Yes, but I think going forward, people, Kansas and other places suggest, and of course the Democrats in Michigan felt, that this was a good thing for the Democrats.
Marty, God love you, but have you been in a coma for the last 10 years? Did you just get out of a coma? I think you're playing with fire, man. I think you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, I'm furious about what the Democrats did in Michigan, where they where they interfered, where they basically, one of the 10 Republicans. How do you even say his last name? Pete Meyer. I was like Meyer, but Meyer. Yeah, one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. I'm not sure it made the difference. I don't know if you can blame the extremism of Republicans on Democrats, but I think
Democrats funded.
Right, but Democrats did put money in behind his opponent on the theory that he would be easier to beat in the general. I mean, I would just remember that there was a bunch of Democrats who were hoping that the Republican candidate in 2016 would be Donald Trump because they believed that he would be easy to defeat. I think that this is so dangerous, and that you should never assume in a country of Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Andy Briggs and all the rest of them that there is someone who is so nuts that they don't have a chance.
And just really quick to the broader global point, if you do think that we're facing a real anti-democratic threat, and I do think that, then the best thing to do is create as broad of a coalition as possible. And this is the lesson from Europe, where they have where they're ahead of us in this trend of having to fight off these types of threats.
Let's get a question on this side. We have one down in the front, and then I promise I'll call on the back of the room. I'll shade my eyes just here. Thank you.
Okay, so a third party would be very difficult. It's never happened in American history. But there is a movement to have a unity ticket with a Democrat and a Republican. And that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's Nancy Jacobson and the No Labels and the Problem Solvers Caucus group.
I also really hate that idea. I'm sorry. It would appeal to me, and so this is me speaking against my own interests, right? Give me a Jared Polis and Liz Cheney ticket, and I'll come out of retirement. Okay? I'd love that. There just aren't a lot of me's. We talked about the quadrant already. So I think that I think that the no labels thing is wasting money. It's just my personal opinion. What I think would work, I think there is one creative idea that would work that is kind of in this vein, or is worth trying at least. I don't think it's going to work in this specific case in Utah, but I think what Evan McMullin is doing in Utah, if somebody put a broader effort into that and to say, we are going to go into red states and the Democratic brand is just not working, it's just too toxic, and so we're going to create a new third brand that just exists in the Deep South or in the mountain, in Utah, Idaho, and Montana or whatever, and John Tester's going to join that party and Evan McMullin, and we're going to create another thing that's like a small faction in order to try to win in these red states like Utah, Idaho, and Montana. I think like a Mountain West, whatever, call it whatever. That could work. I don't think that's definitely going to work, by the way, but like that is more likely to work than either of the two other things I've heard.
For statewide office, not for
Yeah, or Senate
Congress.
too. Yeah, Senate, Congress. Then you'd have a little caucus in the Congress. Maybe you'd have of 4 people that could be a swing vote. If you had Mitt and John Tester and right, like that could work. It's a fantasy, but like it could work if the fantasy was ever tried.
Yeah. Okay, we're on this side. Whoever I'll let the Thank you.
So in a post-midterm and before 2024, and because you're a political operative and a journalist, you deal in the what-ifs. If Merrick Garland and the Justice Department goes after Trump and indicts him, what's the what-if? Because this country is so polarized. Well, what do you foresee happening?
That's great.
Maybe I am very naive about this, but I sort of think that I would be surprised if there really was like an armed uprising in defense of Donald Trump. I don't know how you feel about this, but Donald Trump, if you look at his he hasn't even been able to get people to join his social media site, and so I think people would have been much more angry if he had been kind of taken out of power. But now that he's out of power, I'm sure some people will be super angry, and I'm sure it will be volatile, but there's enough people in the Republican Party that will be relieved to have him out of the way that it's hard for me to imagine, this kind of causing mass civil unrest. What I want to know and what I'm extremely eager to find out about, I haven't seen anything good about about the practicalities of what happens. Does the Secret Service come to jail with him? What prison they put him in?
In what capacity?
But yeah, I don't know. What do you?
I'm just not letting myself hope for a perp walk. Sometimes my mind wanders, and I just imagine the feds going into Mar-a-Lago, and I just shake.
Okay.
Yeah, focus. I think that potential. Look, we're at a volatile time, right? So I don't know. Will there be a handful of people who are unstable, who have been radicalized, do something in response to Merrick Garland? Maybe.
Yeah. I think I just mean that's not like a Civil War scenario, right?
No, of course not. No, but this is the thing that bugs me about all of this is that the people, they do really love Donald Trump, but really what they do is they hate liberals. Mm-hmm. These people hate liberals way more than they love Donald Trump. And so had the Republicans had the cojones to just vote to convict him when he couldn't have run again, had the 17 Republicans done that in February of 21, then the base would have been mad for 2 minutes. Then they would have gotten mad at Joe Biden. They would have moved on to Ron DeSantis, and we would have been done with this guy, and we would have been done with him. And I think the same thing is true with Merrick Garland. I think that the vast majority of Republican voters would be happy to move on to hating Kamala and liking Ron DeSantis, and not worry about it. I think that there could be some skirmishes and little whatever, but.
And the thing about the Republican cowardice in the impeachment vote that is, it will be sweet if it comes to pass, is that the person who, Mitch McConnell, couldn't rise to the occasion to whip people against Donald Trump. If he doesn't become Senate Majority Leader, which is, as far as I can tell from people who know him, all that he cares about, it will be because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump chose candidates like Dr. Oz and Herschel Walker. And the only reason the Democrats really have a chance to keep the Senate is because of Donald Trump and because of the Republican senators who are too cowardly to take their shot.
Great. right, we have a question over here. Thank you.
Hi, Tim. I read the Bulwark.
Hey, thank you. Everyone should read the Bulwark.
My question is, why don't we have a tough team of like Rob Emanuel, David Axelrod, really tough people as a messaging team for the Democrats? I mean, Joe Biden has had quite a few victories. Very few people recognize it. Our messaging for the last 20 years, as long as I've been following it, has been ineffective. And you've got smart people, you've got the press. How come when I open up the New York Times every day, I don't see great accomplishments on the first page?
Michelle's not doing her job. Yeah, I don't know. I think you probably should be calling the crooked media boys, getting them back into the game, out of the podcast business, back on the field. It's a good question. I think that obviously Obama was such a good messenger for himself that I think that is part of this. Like there wasn't this cultivation of other, like Joe Biden needs the help. Like, let's just be honest. Joe Biden needs people out there carrying this message for him. Kamala has just not been up to the job. Like, we just have to be honest about that, of that part of the job. And so, okay, Pete can go on Fox every once in a while, but he's the Secretary of Transportation. He's got another job, right? He can't be. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to you for that. But it's been it's been a failure, and they need to worry about it for the reelect. And I think that Joe Biden got a big break that messaging-wise that COVID happened during the 2020 campaign, so that they could kind of control the messaging a lot better. That won't be the case in 2024, and no matter who it is. Yeah, they got to get these guys off the sidelines, out of the CNN studio. They can't. Have you read the book yet? I don't think they can hire me. There'll be some problems among the staff.
Okay, you've got up top.
Hi, I think this country has often been middle ground, fiscally conservative and socially liberal. What if you had somebody like Mitch Landry, who would have the South, or somebody like the former governor of Rhode Island, who's now Secretary of Commerce? What do you think of that idea? And I'm also worried about the border.
Yeah, I really disagree with the premise of your question. I think that people who are socially liberal but fiscally conservative are very overrepresented in elite enclaves, and there are very few of them anywhere else. I mean, this is what sort of all the survey data suggests. The underserved market in American politics is for something that's like even more fascist adjacent than Donald Trump, right? That is basically, kind of Evita style, socially redistributionist, but very fiscally
Glenn
conservative.
Greenwald,
and,
KKK partnership.
And you actually,
What do you think of Mitch Landry, though?
Marine Le Pen, something along those lines. I want to say one more thing is that I also just don't think, I think that it's a real mistake to underestimate the importance of charisma in politics. People vote for someone often. I don't think this was the case with Joe Biden, but very often they vote for the person they want to see on television. And so, I think that's also something that people have to, people will forgive a lot of kind of policy discordance if they just really like the person.
Yeah, I just add to that, this again is speaking against interest, because I'm not like a left liberal economic populist. But what the Democrats really need to do is better with working class people. That's who the Democrats need to do better with. They don't need to do better with fiscally conservative, socially liberal people. Most of them voted for Joe Biden already. So they need to do better with working class people. I think the Fetterman test case is very interesting in Pennsylvania. That is not my politics, but if it keeps the Trumpers out, that's fine with me. It's certainly better than the alternative. And the Democrats need a messenger who can relate to people who do not share the elite concerns. They were upset about COVID restrictions, right? They were. They have more day-to-day economic concerns. They liked when Trump was talking hard about China, right? That sort of profile, I think, is a much more potentially fruitful profile than for the Democrats than Gina Raimondo, who I love. Again, great. Gina Raimondo, Jared Polis, let's do it. But like, that's just not. I don't think that's the politically smart play.
I'm just asking the producers. I'm not hallucinating that the clock has been reset, so we're good. Okay, we can go a little bit longer. Excellent. Okay, great. Let's have, if we can get some microphones down here. I see right in the middle of the row, right, yep, in the hat, we'll get both, in blue hat, and then we'll come to you.
I'm a little nervous about asking this question because I think it's probably naive. However, I grew up in a family where my father fought in World War II. He was very much a Republican because of Ike. And my mother was totally a Democrat and an artist. And I think my question is, why is everything so extreme? Is there not any hope for, let's say, just for an example, that someone like Lauren Boebert or Bobbitt or whatever her name is, suddenly said, that person, suddenly said, yes, I carry a gun. I believe responsible people should be able to carry a gun, but I also believe in much more strict rules for gun ownership. I believe in having much better laws. What happens to that person?
That person's a Democrat. I mean, that's the thing. That person's a Democrat. I think something that I think people miss about the current Republican Party's position on guns is that it's not that they're saying we need guns because we have the right to self-defense, or certainly not we need guns because we need to hunt. I mean, I would go and look at an ad that Blake Masters, the Senate candidate in Arizona, made, where he's holding some, I don't even know what kind of gun, I mean, I wouldn't know, but it's like some kind of futuristic, it's some super expensive, futuristic, semi-automatic kind of assault rifle, even though I know gun people don't like the term assault rifle. And he's saying, this is not for hunting. This is to kill people. And you need to have the right to have this gun. Basically, I'm not going to try to paraphrase the whole rest of the ad, but basically in case the government becomes tyrannical, right?
Ridiculous.
Like, they hold in reserve the right to wage an insurrection, and they need guns because of that. And so kind of saying, well, why can't we all agree on common sense gun laws? You can't agree on common sense gun laws with people with a political formation that, again, in terms of common ground, I think what Tim said before about they hate liberals more than they love Donald Trump, it's very hard to find common ground with people whose, sort of primary political priority is your destruction.
I'm going to be positive for a second. I don't disagree with any of that, so I'm just going to change the subject. Congress has done a lot more bipartisan stuff this year than any of the smart people said that they were going to, and they get no credit for it. And I was here last week with some of the Colorado state legislators down in Colorado Springs, and they're doing stuff. They were working together behind the scenes. Social media is breaking our brains a little bit, where we think we hate we're being made to think we hate each other. And, there are always cultural differences between people that lived in rural Alabama and people that lived in New York City. That's not new, right? So I don't know. That part of it, the hatred, I don't know how to fix that. But the actual workings of government, we had a bipartisan gun bill, a bipartisan infrastructure bill, a bipartisan chips bill. We let 2 new countries into NATO. All that stuff's pretty good. I think that expectations are out of whack. I think that because politicians are promising the moon to people, but there's been more positive progress on this front in the last 18 months than since since 9/11, really.
You have the mic. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Michelle, as a Texan, what she thinks about the gubernatorial race in Texas. Do you think O'Rourke has a chance to beat Abbott?
So, to me, he asked if Beto O'Rourke, I think, right, if Beto O'Rourke has a chance to beat Greg Abbott in Texas. I see Tim shaking his head.
Next question.
I think it's extremely unlikely, and I also think that this dream that Democrats have, that, eventually Texas is going to turn purple, it's like the Lucy in the football of political predictions. I do think that what we just saw in Kansas changes the calculation a little bit, because this is extremely visceral. In Texas, Texas passed a law called SB 8 last year, and the Supreme Court let it go into effect even before they overturned Roe versus Wade. So even before Roe versus Wade was overturned, abortion was illegal in Texas, and people are already starting to feel the kind of really horrific consequences of that. There are some really powerful ads for Beto O'Rourke. I mean, there's one that there's one of this couple, like a very wanted pregnancy that went really terribly wrong, and the woman had to, was denied. What they basically said, because of this law, we can't end your pregnancy, even though your life is in danger and your baby has no chance of surviving. And she had to, raise money and travel to go get it done. There's a lot of stories like that in Texas. I think they'll probably sway some people, but whether they'll sway enough people, again, miracles happen, but I'm not, I wouldn't bet on it.
Okay, we have, let's come to this side. Just over here on the aisle.
Hi. I'm going to choose a topic that we haven't actually covered, Christian nationalism. So now that Roe v. Wade has gone the way that it's gone.
Can you
Can't hear
speak
me?
up?
Sorry. Christian nationalism. So now that Roe v. Wade is obviously, can you hear this, everybody?
Here we
Sorry.
go. Okay.
Not a pro with a mic. What's the next thing that's going to happen? And how substantial is this group? That can they move the needle on a lot of issues? Should we be scared?
Well, okay, so I will answer this because the subtitle of my first book was The Rise of Christian Nationalism. And that actually came out in 2006, and I was told by a lot of people that I was being hysterical about the influence of this movement, and I feel like I don't hear that as much anymore. And so, I mean, I think it's difficult to talk about it in terms of a group. I mean, there are groups, there's the Council for National Policy, there's various kind of political formations, but more than that, I think it's a political ideology. Like, I have no idea if Doug Mastriano belongs to any Christian nationalist groups, but he, spouts Christian nationalist talking points. When I wrote my book, nobody called themselves a Christian nationalist. Now Marjorie Taylor Greene is selling Christian nationalist T-shirts. And so there are clearly people in Congress who identify as Christian nationalists, which basically Christian nationalism, I'm trying to remember exactly how I defined it in that book, but it's people who believe that America was founded as a Christian nation, and that basically biblical law, because the Constitution derived from biblical law, or at least their interpretation of biblical law, because it's not like they're going around enforcing all of Leviticus, but their interpretation of biblical law, which comes down through various writers, should basically supersede civil law. I think obviously Roe versus Wade was was an important goal. The recent decision on state funding of private religious schools, I think, is also an important achievement for them. I do think that they're going to go after gay marriage or go after Obergefell, even though it'll be, I think, a much harder lift, because you just don't have as much of an organized movement against gay marriage as you did. And then, I think that a lot. So I don't see as many sort of like big kind of pillars that are going to fall the way Roe did, as much as I think you're going to see a kind of a slow encroachment. If you saw this a little bit with George W. Bush, and you're going to see a lot more of it, where it's just basically who gets funded, what kind of people are in the government. Are health and human services grants going to organizations that teach you that, kind of if you have premarital sex, you're basically the equivalent of a piece of used chewing gum. I've sat through some of these abstinence-only or are we going to see huge amounts of funding going to crisis pregnancy centers? I think that's right. And that's slow, I don't think you'll see a lot of, I think the kind of discrimination that you'll see will be kind of creeping. I mean, during George W. Bush's administration, you saw a huge amount of discrimination, even though his rhetoric on Muslims and Islam was sometimes really good. We saw a complete freak out in New York City over a Muslim cultural center. You saw, these occasional explosions of Islamophobia. I think it's been tamped down a little bit, but it could be easily revved up again. And then you'll start seeing little things that Jews aren't allowed to do. You'll see, already you have some government-funded adoption centers that just don't serve Jews, because they don't serve non-Christians. And I think, there was a time when that would have been pretty hard to get your head around. And, sort of now it exists, or at least it existed under Trump, and I'm sure we'll see more things like that in the future.
I want to just end really quick on one minor happy note here. I think there's a lot of that is true, and there's a lot to be concerned about, particularly the courts culturally, the politicized churches. You see these AR-15 churches. Tim Alberto wrote this great article about how politicized evangelical churches have been even more than they already were. So I think there's a lot culturally to be concerned around, a lot to be concerned about with the Supreme Court. But politically, Christian nationalism is just as popular as a dirty sock. Okay, Donald Trump won because he was seen as not that. Donald Trump had a huge portion of Donald Trump's votes are the dudes who watch Barstool and listen to Joe Rogan and want to be able to get an abortion if they knock up their girlfriend, right? People, secular working class people who were creeped out by Ted Cruz, and thought that really religious conservatism didn't appeal to them. Donald Trump was seen to them as a cad, a New York cad from TV, right? He's not going to come after my rights. And so obviously he did, and so Donald Trump kind of played both sides, and that worked to his favor. So that could happen again, somebody could play a bait and switch. But this Doug Mastriano, Marjorie Taylor Greene, these people are 22% of the country max, right? It's just not a popular platform. And so on the political side of things, I think that you can rest easy that, we're not going to have whatever.
I think you're right. We're not going to have, kind of Christian nationalist junta, presumably, but right.
We're not going to have a junta.
I do keep the ambassador to Canada's card in my wallet, but I literally do. But I also think that, I don't think we can comfort ourselves by saying it's only 22% of the population, because it's much more than 22% of the Republican Party, and there's big parts of the country where the Republican Party is, kind of basically unopposed, and we're seeing this kind of tighten. This is why every political discussion I have comes back to minority rule. I think that the people who Kansas, I think, is going to be is just going to remind a lot of people on the right, kind of why democracy is not their friend.
Well, we could keep going for a long time, but we extended our time together because it's such wonderful, thoughtful questions. I just want to remind you again. First of all, I want to say thank you to Tim and Michelle. Remind you. Is for sale, and I also encourage you, while there are no copies out on the table, that Michelle has 3 wonderful books too. So support both of them, and thank you very much.